Hey everybody, I'd like to say hello and welcome you to the first video. Andrew Dixon and myself, Sean Carr, will be delivering you today. And you're now watching the Speak Easy Reviews channel. And what we're going to be doing on this channel is kind of reliving our past a bit, reliving some of these older films. We may even look at some present films, but we're going to be looking at films in the past and really analyzing whether they were actually good. So please do join us. Andrew and I are down here in our prospective basements and garage or garage, depending on where you're from. We have our drinks. Andrew, how are you doing today?
Cheers, everybody. I'm doing fine. Nice weather out here for the first day of spring, and ready to discuss some Back to the Future.
Yes, and that is exactly it. We've decided our first video on the Speak Reviews channel is going to be Back to the Future, and I think it's fair to say that going into this, would you say before you watch this film, I guess a second time in with a reviewer's eye, if I asked you, do you like Back to the Future, what would your answer be?
Of course.
Brilliant film. I would agree with that. And I thought the best way to start this, I found some interesting points. If you Google interesting facts about Back to the Future, you get a shit ton of stuff. And I found the 8 most interesting facts. And I'm curious to hear if you had ever heard of these. So first point, the Back to the Future script was rejected more than 40 times. So the script rejected more than 40 times, every major studio, and by some more than once. We go back. So this is from, I think, Robert Zemeckis. We go back when they changed management. It was always one of two things. It was, well, this is time travel, and those movies don't make any money. We get a lot of that. We also got, there's a lot of sweetness to this. It's too nice. We want something raunchier, like Porky's. Why don't you take it to Disney? So you know that it was rejected as many times as it was.
I had no idea, and I wonder, although if I really don't know much about the background of the film, so, and maybe you do, I haven't really researched it, but I wonder how close the original script was to what they actually filmed.
I don't know. That's one thing I don't know, is how close it was to the original film. But what I do know is there was a lot of changes, and there's actually one change in here. If you didn't do much research, there's one surprising change, but we'll get to that. So another interesting point. So in the early drafts, the DeLorean was actually an old refrigerator. So there was a change in that regard. Elijah Wood made his film debut in Back to the Future.
That I knew.
And do you know where he made his debut? Do you remember where that was?
He is in the second one. He's one of the boys in the 80s Cafe.
Yes, so it's right when Michael J. Fox or Marty is playing the what was that shooter game? Quick Draw?
Oh yeah, I think so.
And this one, I didn't know about this. This is a surprising one. Michael J. Fox was not the first person cast as Marty McFly.
Oh, that I knew too, because it's Tim Roth, right?
No.
Who was it? It was somebody from like that period,
well,
like the Pulp Fiction crew.
Yes, Eric Stoltz.
Eric Stoltz. There we go. And in fact, I think you can see there is some footage out there of Eric Stoltz, because they did a day or two's worth of shot footage with him, I think.
I think one of the issues would be down to Eric Stoltz, and the way he portrayed it, from what I understand, it was really serious. And Leah Thompson had a story that she shared, which I thought was interesting. Leah Thompson tells a story about the first ever table reading with the whole cast, where everybody was laughing and joking as they read the script. Afterwards, Stoltz was asked what he thought and said, "Everybody's laughing, but it's not a comedy. It's a tragedy. My whole family remembers a different history to what I do. It's really very sad." Kind of a downer.
That's the most Eric Stoltzy thing I've ever heard, I think.
Well, he's a method actor, isn't he?
That's right. Yeah.
So he probably was really putting himself in the position of Marty McFly, feeling sort of abandoned in this different time and worried about, how his impact was going to change the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was very at home in those Quentin Tarantino films and other films of that ilk in the 90s. And yeah, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around. If Back to the Future had starred Eric Stoltz, it probably would have been a flop, and all those studios would have been right.
It would have been, I think Michael J. Fox really, and that was who Robert Zemeckis, I think, wanted first. And when the other thing I read was when they decided it wasn't working with Eric Stoltz, they went back to Family Ties. Michael J. Fox was filming
Right.
Family Ties at the time,
Yeah.
and they were able to get Michael J. Fox give him permission to read the script, which Michael J. Fox, of course, loved the script. And he ended up having to work some stupid like 21-hour days. He only had like 3 hours sleep because he would be filming in the day Family Ties, and then in the evening he'd be doing his Back to the Future filming.
Yeah, this I remember as well. I do remember reading that. Yeah, he had these. They had to cut the Family Ties producers. First of all, in the first place, said no. They declined to let him out, so that's why he wasn't cast in the first place. And then, yeah, they came back and begged, and then they worked out this very strenuous schedule for Michael J. Fox. But from the point of view of the producers of Family Ties, it was a generous deal that they were allowing him to do this.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine that film with anybody else. John Cusack was somebody else who was in for the role, which I actually could have seen John Cusack doing that and doing that pretty well, actually. Ralph Macchio, not so much.
No. Ralph Macchio is too convincing as like a 15-year-old in The Karate Kid at age 21 to make it work, I think.
I never thought Ralph Macchio was that good of an actor. Every time I see him as an actor, it just seems really amateurish whenever I see him.
Yeah, I don't know that good is necessarily the word I would use, but in The Karate Kid and the thing that they're asking him to do, play a high school student, he's very convincing. When I found out he was actually 21 when that was filmed, my mind was blown. You know, because you think about like how often it's really the other way when they cast somebody as a high school student, you're like, come on, you know,
not a chance.
Yeah,
real deep voice.
Yeah, like
right. 5 o'clock.
Yeah, the Fonz was in high school for what, 20 years or something like that in Happy Days.
How old was the Fonz on Happy Days? How old was he meant to be?
I believe at least at the beginning he's supposed to be in high school, and for the first several years of that show. Or high school age, maybe a drop. I didn't watch Happy Days that much, so I can't give you a chapter and verse on the plot. But like at the very least, he's supposed to be playing either a teenager or a young man. He's clearly in his 30s by the end of that.
No way. There's no way he was ever. I never even considered him I thought he was just sort of like a friend of the family. I didn't think he was in high school.
Look, I wouldn't swear to this, but I just feel like that they were playing him for younger than he clearly was.
Yeah. I don't know how old he was when he filmed it either, but it was a very iconic role, but definitely not a high school student, not even close.
No.
But so that takes us to the film itself. I mean, when you watched it again, any different thoughts, or was there anything that stood out to you?
You know, what stood out to me was that I got lost in it. I put it on at like 10:30 at night. And first of all, it's longer than I always think it is going to be. But not necessarily in a bad way. I just look at the time on it. I'm thinking, okay, this is like an hour and a half, 40-minute comedy. I can bang this out at 10:30. And it's like 2 full hours. I'm like, oh. Yeah. But it kept me very awake and engaged the entire time. I was totally enjoying the film, even though I've seen it. This is not one of those movies that I've watched into the ground. So that might be part of it, where I'm not going like, oh, this is the scene that comes next. And this is the scene that comes next. And I can't wait to see this part. Like, as I rewatch it, it had been at least 5 years probably. I mean, I had watched it when I was in this house. So we moved in 2014. And I remember we had a weekend or something or a couple weeks where we invited my uncle and my cousin over, and we watched all 3 movies over the course of like a couple weeks or something. And, but that was probably at least, I'm thinking that was before Harlan was born or when he was an infant. So we're talking about, 6 years ago. And so, and even at that time, I've really only seen the third one like twice.
The third one I've seen more recently. And I'd be curious to hear how would you rank them, by the way? Not that we're going to spend too much time on 2 and 3, but how would you rank them? Obviously, 1 is the best. I don't think that's even a discussion.
No, and I like the second one probably better than the third one. And I know the second one gets dumped on a lot. I remember hearing, for some reason, I didn't see that one for years. My father had different thing. I remember one time. He rented Back to the Future for me when I was a kid, and I
Mm.
definitely saw it more or less at the time. I mean, it was on home video, but my parents were relatively early adopters of the VCR and all that, so I probably saw it in 86, 87, and it came out in 85, I think. So I saw it more or less. I'm sure I saw it before the second one had come out,
Mm.
which they were kind of late on that one, relatively speaking, when you think about the way they do stuff today. It was 4 years later that the second one came out in 89.
I think they filmed them together as well. They
The
filmed
second
them
and the
over the
third,
course of a year, the second
the,
and third.
yeah,
I,
that was all done together.
I actually, since I've been watching, they've been airing them over here in the UK. So for anybody who's just tuning in for the first time, Andrew and I grew up together, but I've moved to England, and been playing Back to the Future quite a bit here on the film channels,
Hmm.
and I've watched 3 a few times, and I've actually changed my order. I actually prefer 3 over 2 now.
And I remember looking. My father, we used to always have in the family, like every year, we would buy the Leonard Maltin guide to the movies or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, before the internet, it was how if you wanted to know the cast of a movie or read a capsule review, and they gave they rated them 1 to 4 stars basically. And the second one they didn't really like, and then the third one they gave like 3.5 stars. And I know my uncle really likes the third one. I'm not disliking the third one. I just remember kind of like I felt like it my recollections of the third one when I think of it are that it's fine, but it's kind of not as exciting, because they have to bring the thing to a conclusion, and the conclusion is sort of has an inevitability to it. The second one, the fact that they're going into the future, which I just find more interesting than going into a Western, and that he's going into the future, but then having to go back to the past and to revisit scenes from the first film and how they construct that. I just think it was a more exciting filmmaking process. That's me.
I think for me, the reason I've grown to like 3 better is I think the plot is a lot less problematic than 2. And I think you have to do a lot less work to enjoy the film 3 over 2, because 3 is it's a little bit more simplistic in what they're trying to do and doing it in a different time and era. Whereas with all the back and the forth in 2, you could tell there was a lot of work by the writers to try to make this thing fairly fluid. And I think at times it gets a bit sort of hit and miss with how they justify the decisions they're making.
I guess one thing I would say, if you're asking me my thoughts, what I kind of noticed watching the first one this time, and I started to watch the second one. Unfortunately, I didn't get to finish it. I had intended to last night, but I got sidetracked. But they're really not. I mean, I would say that they're amusing, but not funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not comedies, really. They're light action, I think, for lack of a better term. I mean, the first one's probably the jokiest of the 3.
Yeah.
The second one, I mean, they have the broad performance.
The second one.
Oh, it's definitely darker. I mean, the broad performances are still there, like Biff being just, and his Biff's grandson being like completely psychotic, is fascinating.
I think he was well down the road of criminal, almost like Kingpin in the second one.
Yeah.
The first one,
that's Biff, the father, right? There's Biff. Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm getting the pieces of it confused, but yeah.
But this is my problem with 2 is you have to stop. I mean, there's so many things in 2 that and actually I'm going to come on to 2 when we finish, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I want to jump back to something you were talking about, how you got immersed in that.
Yeah,
and it reminded me of why I loved the film the first time I saw it. And there's certain films that maybe I like that I wouldn't expect to like. This isn't one of those. I would expect to like this one, but just to sort of quantify what I'm trying to say, when he went into the future for the first time I watched that film, I was really engrossed, almost watching it through his eyes, what it would be like to go back in time, because they did the time travel thing so well in Back to the Future 1, and how the DeLorean went back into time, and how you watched it through sort of his first person eyes of driving down the parking lot and then in the farmer's field, and then him walking into town for the first time in the 1950s. You really sort of immerse yourself into that what if kind of experience. And I think that was one of the things the film did really well for me.
I agree. I agree. That yeah, when he's in the mall parking lot and suddenly, and you know what I have to say, he's in a farmer's barn. That actually, for me, I think it helps, as you say, kind of immerse you in the world of the film and the perspective of of Marty McFly.
Yeah.
And for me, on a very personal level, because I will say that, believe it or not, my father's father, my pop, he owned a ranch slash farm on land that he wound up selling to a developer so they could put in a parking lot for the Montgomeryville Mall. So
The future of Hilldale.
yes, indeed. So yes,
That's something that sticks with me, is him going into town and him going into the cafe. And it's like you said, it's not funny. It's all these like cute little jokes where it's so 80s at the same time too, because he orders a drink. He's like, "Can I have a Pepsi free? Can I have a tab? If you want to get something, pay for. Can I have something that's sugar free?" Like this
by the way, do you even know what a Pepsi free is?
Was that the first effort at that wasn't a Diet Pepsi, was it?
I believe that was a caffeine-free Diet Pepsi. I believe that was what they originally called caffeine-free Diet Pepsi, that they didn't specify that what it was free of everything. Because I think the end of that joke, he says that something with no sugar, right? So it doesn't have caffeine, it doesn't have all this stuff. By the way, speaking of that Pepsi free, the other thing I will say, and I was sitting there thinking about as I was watching it, the one thing that kind of distracted me as I was watching Back to the Future again by myself on the couch was the product placement and how aggressive it really was.
Oh my God. That was 1985 though, and I think that was at the time.
But that was actually my question. Yeah, but Die Hard's 89.
Is it that late? Well, it was an 80s thing. The product placement was
well, it's a now thing too.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is, like, I was sitting there thinking to myself, is this the first movie that was this high concept in terms of the product place? I don't remember a movie that I've seen anyway from before it. I was sitting there trying to think as I was watching it. Can I think of a movie that predates this one where the product placement is this aggressive?
Ghostbusters. I'd say Ghostbusters.
Okay.
I think Ghostbusters, because it was in New York City, was big on product placement. Tom Hanks.
But that's 86.
Is that 86?
It is. Ghostbusters, I think, is 84. So you might have me there. The one that came into my mind was Blade Runner, if you've ever seen that, because there's a big, I believe there's you see an Atari sign in the background at one point, and JVC maybe, I think.
Oh, you know what? That reminds me. Before then, what is it? Arnold Schwarzenegger, Running Man. Yeah,
that I've never seen.
Oh, that's a very. I'm going to do that thing where you go, "Oh, how could you not have seen that? You have to watch it."
But you know what? Running Man was 1987.
Oh, was it that late?
It was, and now I'm going to look up Die Hard.
I would argue that is one of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Die Hard was 88. So
Christmas film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we could have that podcast someday.
Yeah, we need to save that for Christmas. Let's not get into that now.
Well, the thing is, I agree with you. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, we'll have to make that point because people who watch this may not see, or when they watch our Christmas special, aren't necessarily going to see this. But yeah, definitely Christmas film. There's no doubt about it.
For sure.
Yeah, but
So what were your points though? You were running through a list of points about.
There was a few things about the film and for me, there's certain things in the film that jump out to me that I think you give it a pass because it does everything so well. And I think time travel films are historically problematic. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if you want it, like, to me, the ultimate for time travel, because a movie sequence that does it really pretty well, even though I'm not a big fan of the first one, but I think as they get more bizarre and off the beaten path they get better, is Planet of the Apes.
Oh God. Yeah.
And that guy, that writer, I mean, every time I remember reading that he talked about, like, every time they got financial approval to do a sequel, he got out his chart about like how to like keep the timeline straight, and like was mapping things.
Yeah.
There's not as much like direct time travel within any particular film, but because of the nature of, the The first film, obviously, he's gone way, way, way into the future, and he realizes that it's a U.S. that's gone. And then from there, he has to kind of track like how do the rest of the timepieces fit in, because some of them are ahead of that film, some of them are earlier than that first film. Yeah. Anyway.
Those are that has the ending. Not to jump off Back to the Future, but the unveil at the end of the original Back to the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. I think is one of the best endings.
It's a great ending.
Yeah, just that whole unveiling. And I don't know. When I watched it, I was younger and I was shocked by that. Was that something that was shocking for people?
Oh, I think so. The only problem for me was I read a short story that was part of my freshman English class, and maybe it's even like I think Planet of the Apes does have a literary, genesis. I don't know if it's a novel or what, but anyway, the story has more or less the same ending, and the teacher pointed that out. And I had never seen Planet of the Apes, so Planet of the Apes, in other words, was spoiled for me by my freshman high school English class.
That's one for another day. Planet of the Apes.
Love those movies. Well, the one I would want to talk about is number 4, which is Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. But
I've not seen that one, so that's what I would need to watch.
Yeah, track it down. It's worthwhile.
But I think it does show that time travel is challenging, and there's certain things in the film that when I watched it, this time, really with a different eye, I really struggled with. And I think the first one was the whole centering around the picture, the fading picture. Because the picture fades fine. He fixes the issue. The fading comes back. And everything that's happened in the film has fundamentally changed the people in this film. George McFly is not even the same person. His decision-making is going to be very different from there on out. And the picture sort of reimagines itself in exactly the same way. Assuming George McFly makes these same exact decisions, even going on the same vacation spot, wearing the same clothes, I found that a little problematic.
Yeah, that's true. The picture I'm trying to remember, does the picture change? Because I'm trying to remember now. I watched it, just now, and he does I feel like he notices that there's something different somewhere prior to his arrival.
That may be one that we need to check out. What I might do is I might find this because we're recording this, we're not live. And I may put the picture up somewhere,
right?
Pop it up on the screen. And when we're watching, if anybody is watching this, comment below. Do you think the picture is any different to what it was the first time when he goes into time travel?
And I got to tell you, I don't know that it was the picture, but I feel like there's something that happens that sort of tips. I mean, certainly Doc asks him, like, does a double take when Marty McFly says to him, well, my old man stood up to Biff. I couldn't believe it. I didn't think he had it in him. He never did that before. And Doc looks at him and says, never. And that's your tell, like, because even Doc's now thinking, you've changed.
This is a problem.
Changed the future, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like there's something that just a brief look, and it must be in the picture, but I didn't catch what it was. I remember thinking like, there must be something different. It was more that I saw the reaction of Michael J. Fox, of Marty McFly, to the picture, and I thought he must be seeing something that I'm not catching. But I could be wrong about that.
That's something we need to check. But this is the beginning of something that, like, I thought about through the film. Now, it didn't distract me enough to say that this ruined the film for me. It didn't at all. And I think I'm nitpicking if I'm being honest.
Oh yeah.
But even from then on out, like, so moving forward, then when he comes back, and there's one other thing I want to talk about before then, but when he comes back to the point that he goes back, and this is me nitpicking, he decides that he's going to go back 10 minutes prior to Doc getting shot to save his ass. That really only gives him like 3 minutes if the gas doesn't run out in the DeLorean to get to Doc to save his ass. Why not go back 30 minutes before? Why not an hour? Why not a day earlier?
Those are all valid questions. I actually thought you were going to go the other way with it, which is it creates, it's a voluntary creation of a time paradox in the middle of that.
So maybe that's why he had to go back to then, because he is watching himself at one point.
And I mean, if you're going to ask the question that you asked about the photograph by the same, well, I guess it wouldn't quite. Never mind. I guess I'll withdraw that comment.
I know, because you know what? I know what you're thinking, because this was my next thought then in this progression. Doc reads the letter. He has a bulletproof vest on, and let's make the argument that Marty didn't have a lot of time to think. Just said 10 minutes before. It was a pretty frantic series of events before he drove into the lightning bolt. And let's just say he wanted to be as consistent with time as possible because that's right around the time his self leaves, and he doesn't want to be there when his self is there. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing this was I think the biggest distracting point of all the changes that happened. They bought the same house. The furniture changed, so they addressed the furniture changing. But like Marty is now in this reality where he has no memory of how these things have come to light. And everything has just happened in the same order with totally different people, totally different personalities. His sister, his brother, not even the same people. And he doesn't remember how they got to the way they were. For me, that's problematic for me.
Yeah. I mean, now that you're bringing it up, I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. Literally all of that is, continuity errors, if you want to call it that. The fact that he would remember it all. Shouldn't he remember life now as it was? I mean, really, it starts with the fact that he can go back 10 minutes earlier. And honestly, I was jolted, even though I kind of knew it was the case, that when he arrives 10 minutes earlier in the future, rather than him merging with the body that existed, he comes back as a second body. So he can see.
I think it's okay, though.
Really?
Because for me, of
course, that explains. Well, hold on. Then that explains away the continuity thing that you just objected to. Because what is happening then is that Marty McFly has replaced himself. Because the Marty McFly that didn't know all that stuff goes into the past, and it's replaced by the Marty McFly who does. Because there's two Marty McFlys now.
But this Marty, and that's right. I think that's consistent with the time travel piece because he's on a linear path in different times, and he's watching what is going to be him moving ahead. So now he's in the right time. He's the only person to be existing in that time because he came back. But he came back, and maybe this is something that, this is why the movie's good, because now there's a discussion point. They didn't make it so obvious by having Marty say, oh, I remember this stuff now that I didn't experience. So, maybe there was some enlightenment that he got because he's now present in this time, how his brother and sister are, totally different people. And yet, they recognize each other. They can, he's now got this truck all of a sudden. And how did you get this truck that's now parked in the garage? And like, for me, that's something I just couldn't get that out of my head.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of those moments where, the end of the film, what was more important, this is where although I said at the beginning, it's not really on a review here, and it's not, it's not my second time watching it. It's not my third. It's probably my, I don't know, sixth or seventh time watching Back to the Future. I'm thinking, well, it's not really a comedy much, but to the extent that it is, that whole tag sequence, that's where some of the big jokes are, the payoff jokes are, and they only work though if he can be like the audience, surprised and
you're
shocked
watching it
by what. Yeah.
Because I'm nitpicking. I am 100% nitpicking, and to be
fair,
that's
the difference though between it being comedy and science fiction, right? If it were science fiction, then he would have to behave in accordance with some set of rules that govern time travel if you actually think it through. If it's a comedy and you're only worried about getting the laughs, you want Marty McFly to like react, give you all the face shot reactions of like, Dad? Brother? I forget the brother's name, but
the other thing, I think so I'm willing to even give that a pass. The other thing, which I'm not really going to nitpick on it for, that I noted was how that one punch really just made Biff into this like weak, fragile little wuss of a man. Now, I'm not going to talk about how in Back to the Future 2, he's like a tough guy after he gets knocked out with Marty McFly. He's that is a genuine continuity issue with the film because he somehow turns into this sniveling little I'm scared of George McFly thing.
But when he turns into the tough guy in the 2, it's because he has the book, the almanac.
He had the almanac anyway. He apparently had the almanac in the second go around in Back to the Future 2 because he had brought it back to himself. But even then, like in that timeline, he sees Marty McFly. When he sees Marty McFly in that second timeline after he gets knocked out, he doesn't look like he's emotionally traumatized to the point where he's now washing George McFly's car and apologizing for not getting it done in time.
Well,
I'm sorry. Your book's here, George.
Well, I mean, yeah, these continuity issues are,
They're
they're minor, but that's fine. I mean, nitpicking. I mean, I think that's part of. If you're going to do a time travel movie, as a producer or director, you're signing up for a certain degree of that. You got to know your audiences because of the type of audience you're going to attract. You're not going to get like the sort of moviegoer who's not that interested in thinking about things too deeply. If you're going to bring time travel in as a plot element, right, you're going to get the sci-fi crew. You're going to get the kind of people who like to sit there and think about, does this work or not, get philosophical about the film. So,
but this
they're inviting their own trouble.
I think that's an interesting point because that to me, if this film comes out now, and let's say the special effects are updated, everything is here and now, and the plot's more or less the same. I think with all the keyboard warriors and film reviewers, maybe a little bit less reverent than ourselves, I don't know that this film works as well in modern day.
Well, that could be. I mean, it was certainly, I can't think of anything. That's one of the exciting things about the movie. And I think one of the reasons why it's maintained its reputation is because from before it, I can't think of a lot that's like it.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, nothing. I'm sure there were time travel films. Nothing's leaping to mind, but I'm sure there must have been. But I can't think of any that certainly not done as well as this one was.
I think it's the casting and the writing and the acting, but I think also with
the special effects. I mean, like the look of it, it really works.
But for the thing that really I think brings this is a I think a museum piece in many respects, given how films are now with the soundtrack. You don't see films with that orchestrated soundtrack like Indiana Jones or Star Wars.
Sure.
And Back to the Future had an epic soundtrack. I mean, just the way the orchestra played through the scenes and the action.
Yeah. No, the soundtrack certainly adds to it. And it was, you're right, the halcyon days of, I mean, you can thank George Lucas for that because prior to Star Wars, I mean, this is kind of famous, right? That the idea that a film would have an original composed score like that had really kind of fallen out of favor. Then Star Wars comes along and now every movie has one, like some of them done by like someday I'd love to do on this channel on the so bad it's good side. I've told you I love the entire catalog of Canon films. They were like sort of the cheap movie producers, and so like something like Masters of the Universe that came out in 87. Oh, it's horrible, but it still has a orchestrated theme, and I'm sure they must have paid like some guy who was like living on a park bench drinking like 40 bottles of malt liquor who was like a down on his luck composer, like, I want to do a movie. Well, it was that kind of production, but
you definitely have to.
Yeah, but at the same time, what they did for Back to the Future really works, of course. Yes, and it was the style of the time, to be sure.
Yeah, there hasn't been anything quite like it since then. That's the thing I really miss, is I miss that orchestrated soundtrack that just sort of goes with the action. And I think now we're in sort of the days where, and I do like it. I do like modern music in film and TV. I think it really works. Actually, The Hat. I don't know if you've seen the TV show Peaky Blinders.
No, I have not.
It's one of my all-time favorites. Probably one of the best gangster TV. I think it's better than The Sopranos. But it's as good. It's I don't know if do you know anything about that TV show?
No, I have not seen it at all.
So the TV show is set back in Birmingham, where not far from where I live. Set in sort of this I think early 1800s, about a gang in Birmingham. And in it, it's a historical piece, but they use a lot of modern sort of rock music in it. Okay, and that's kind of the direction I think film scores are going to now. It's using popular music is the thing. You don't really see the orchestras anymore.
No, I think that's. Although I will say it's still somewhat, I think, in vogue in superhero movies to some degree. Like I know Justice League, Danny Elfman did the score for that. Of course, he did the score for Batman in the 80s and of The Simpsons. I mean, he's a prolific composer.
Oh, I know it, Danny Elfman.
So, but it is not what it used to be. Honestly, I think that movie soundtracks are actually, and this is me being an old man crank, but they're one of the things that's wrong with the way movies are produced today. I think that they were overdone in certain ways, and that the way that they were, you know, again, Back to the Future, it's there, it's complementing the film, but it never feels like it's interfering with the film or telling you how to feel. It does feel like it adds something without becoming overbearing. And that I think is often a problem in modern day filmmaking. But
there's and we're I think when with a lot of the film we look at, and I think we talked about this when you and I talked about Rocky. I think there's higher expectations to what films have to be now. You can't just go and watch a film and get lost in a film.
Yeah,
and now there's a lot more responsibility for the shit that I'm going to be very contradictory of myself here, but the shit that I'm nitpicking is the stuff that you know will destroy a film now. And I think you had a lot more latitude to just make a fun film and not worry as much. Focus on the effects and focus on the people and the actors and you know the jokes and the fun, and not so much about the realism. Everything now is about the realism, which I'm just as bad as anybody looking for that.
And it's also goofy that you're right. There is like this kind of weird, what I would consider to be like a juxtaposition, frankly, of this hyper interest in realism and believability and whatnot, and like superhero. Like, I don't care how realistic it is. It's still a man dressed up like a bat. That's not going to happen. Fighting crime.
I get, this is why I get so tired with these superhero films, because they just, you know, they have a superpower, and then as the film evolves, as the budget gets bigger, their power becomes a bit more godlike. And there isn't a situation that, you know, even you know, Iron Man, you know, as Iron Man's character develops, the first Iron Man film I thought was a fairly serviceable action film.
Oh, we loved it. My wife and I. It was fantastic. It was well written, sharp, really enjoyable, surprising throughout. Really one of my favorite films, I would say, of the of the previous decade.
Robert Downey Jr., amazing in that character role. But as the films evolved, you know, his involvement with these godlike characters, you know, these villains who were just, you know, incredibly powered, and he's being slammed around, and, you know, all of a sudden his you know, organs and things are now immune to the law of physics. Now, I don't worry too much about that. I like the first Iron Man, but the more it happens, the more it's like, okay, we know no matter what happens to Iron Man in his suit, he is pretty much invincible. So I'm not really worried about him getting hurt at any point in this film. And that sort of takes away some of the drama and intrigue for me.
Well, and I think you hit really the nail on the head. So many of these films, they just spiral upwards in an ever escalating, like, they have to keep upping this. Like, there's this idea that, like, every movie has to, the whole world has to be threatened. The existence of the planet's going to blow up. Well, that's because they've made the heroes themselves invincible. So where are the stakes? You know what I mean? Like, it has to be like the notion of innocent civilians. But of course, the innocent civilians aren't going to be characters. So it's really just kind of like, yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, I don't want the planet to blow up. I mean, I live here, so you know, but but it doesn't feel immediate. There's no danger for the actual characters on the screen, and so they make the mistake of the bigger the villain, the bigger the threat, the more exciting that it is. And in fact, it's really, you can make a movie about, you know, a guy trying to prevent himself being erased from existence. And just a regular bully. Yeah. You know, Biff is a perfectly serviceable villain, and he's just a bully.
But this is the story. These are relatable stories, and a superhero film, what makes it interesting is there's a relatability, or you put yourself into this picked on character or this against all odds character. And, you know, the more powerful they get, the less against all odds they are, the less endearing it is to me.
Sure. I would carve out a special exception for Superman of that statement, and I can give you a whole podcast on that, but that's another thing.
Superman's one we have to do. But Superman, you know, they made him beatable in those films. You know, they
the
brought
original,
in
the 78 and 80,
So it's not as if he was without without any sort of challenge. But
Yeah.
there was one film that actually I thought really pointed this out to me that I was surprised that I enjoyed. Now I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. Was the Thor film, the original Thor film?
I've heard that's good, but I've never seen it.
I wouldn't say that it's good, but it's you have this story about this fallen god who comes to Earth and meets humans, and there's I know that's a story that's been done, but it's still a story about people. It's almost like it's reminiscent of Superman when he is learning to deal with his powers as a human. It's sort of along that ilk.
Yeah, or originality on these types of things, I don't worry about. It's a question of whether it's well done or not, And I believe that one was directed by Kenneth Branagh, unless I misremember.
Was it really?
I believe so. And so that's sort of unusual in and of itself, right? That you basically get a committed actor, thespian, Shakespearean actor, who's directed and starred in his own versions of Hamlet and Henry V and things like that, deciding to go ahead and do a comic book movie.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was gonna say there was one other that I would put in. Again, it's about people, and I always found it, and I get a lot of disagreement for this. The Wolverine film, the original Wolverine film with Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
I know maybe part of it is I was a Wolverine fan. I got the comic book growing up, but I thought that was an interesting story. His story was a little bit more gritty and a little bit less superhero, and it was a little bit more down with the people. And I think that was more relatable than, let's say, the X-Men series.
Sure. I did not. I'll be honest. I've never seen the first X-Men. I didn't really like. I was never a big Marvel guy growing up, although I did like Spider-Man. So I stopped with Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was the second film in the reboot. And I think that film didn't do so well. And I've heard that some of the more recent films are actually quite good, but I have not seen those. But prior to, other than that Marvel character, my point is, other than Spider-Man, I did see the Iron Man film, and I saw Iron Man 2 because I liked Iron Man so much. I thought Iron Man 2 was a missed opportunity. I thought it was pretty good, but it could have been better.
Yeah.
And other than that, I don't know, like the scope. I know it is exciting on one level, and it's an amazing project that they undertook to create that Marvel Cinematic Universe and do a 22 film sequence or whatever. But the scope of it, frankly, I found kind of to be a barrier to entry almost. It's like, do I really want to invest? Because they also got quite bombastic. I think in a previous episode of this, I might have complained about Peter Jackson and what he does. And it felt like the influence of
about
him,
Lord of the Rings.
Right. And I think the influence of him on all those movies is so. I did watch Avengers, and it was like, I part of it I will say is I hadn't seen all of the films leading up to it. And so some of what was in it, if you haven't seen those, it gets lost in the translation. But I felt like the film was long, overly bombastic, and not, and yet it is, of course, one of the highest grossing films, and its sequels, the highest grossing films and most anticipated films of the last 15 years. They certainly outdid things like Star Wars, right? But they just weren't for me, I guess is the way I would say it.
I find them boring. The one
Correct. That's what I
had
find
a friend
boring.
of mine. I had a friend of mine who I have a friend of mine who he's big in the Marvel comic films and doesn't understand my distaste for the Avenger films. And I'll be fair, I've only watched 15 minutes of them on a few different occasions and just couldn't really be bothered. And he said, okay, well, how about Guardians of the Galaxy? He's like, that is an incredible film. Now his taste in films are different than mine, but I watched it with my wife, who was a film student, and she's very particular about film.
I'll bet she wins.
We enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy. I would say it's the closest attempt to Star Wars I've seen. Like it's very Star Wars Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
I mean, even Groot is like the Chewbacca kind of character in some regard.
I don't like finding that I've become this crank in my old age, and there are times when I'm like, geez, I really need to like get the stick out of my talkus, and try to like things, but so I will take a look at Guardians of the Galaxy in an effort to like something.
So I fell asleep trying to watch the film twice, but to be fair, I was on a plane between, I was on a long haul flight. So that wasn't fair to the film. And when we watched it, the fact that my wife said, "Yeah, that was okay. I'd watch the next one." She hates superhero films. So
Okay.
I think it's worth watching. I don't think it's incredible,
Right.
but I think it's probably the best effort of that kind of film in a long time.
Sure.
But that doesn't make it an incredible film.
So are we turning this into the episode about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or shall we return to Back to the Future?
Well, I think we return. I like the fact we just let the conversation go.
That's sure. Yeah.
I think that's kind of how we're going to develop this as we go, and I like the fact that we just sort of go on these tangents. But I think what we were linking to with Back to the Future is it was very relatable, and that was the best thing about that film. It had a little bit of underdog story. It was a very people oriented film.
Yeah.
But
Marty McFly's your classic everyman.
Michael J. Fox, incredible in that film.
Sure.
He was. I couldn't think of another person really to play it to that degree. And even Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd, I couldn't see anybody else doing that role.
No, he's tremendous. I mean, he really makes the movie. And not that Michael J. Fox isn't good, but it doesn't work without Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah. I think Leah Thompson, she's very good in it, but you could cast anybody else to play that role. Biff Tannen, again, he's an iconic character in that film. I read, actually, he had so many questions from the film, he was carrying cards in his pocket that answered all the questions he was getting asked. So he just got tired of answering so often, he just says, "Here." If you're a fan of the film, you're probably not a fan of that. But like Biff Tannen, very good in the as the character. But yeah, it could be anyone else. I could make an argument that Crispin Glover, as George McFly, he really carried that role quite well.
He did. He's an interesting character in and of himself. Crispin Glover.
He sued Bob Gale, the producer.
Yes, I do know that.
For this. Because I didn't realize this. I didn't realize that wasn't him hanging upside down. In the film.
No, I mean, they do a good job of fooling you, and I had never really thought about it too much. But yeah, no, they.
So he was offered $150,000 to come back in 2. Now Michael J. Fox was offered $5 million. He didn't think he was worth. I think he thought he was worth $1.5 or $2 million. I don't think he was worth that much in the role that he played in that film.
No, and especially in the second film, he wasn't going to have. Look at how it's constructed. There's no part for him. Even if they wrote down his part, reduced his part, obviously, because they knew they weren't going to be using him. But even if they hadn't done that, and you could say that the second one is constrained to some degree in the way it tells the story, because Crispin Glover's not back, because they switched the actresses for I was reading about, one thing I did read is that Zemeckis said that he would not have ended. The first film wasn't necessarily meant to have a sequel, and that's why you produced the first film in any series. Well, because you think to yourself, maybe if this isn't a hit with the public, if it loses money, we're obviously not making a second one, right? So you make it to be a standalone film, and they weren't necessarily thinking in terms of a trilogy. So the ending sequence of the first film was really just meant as a final gag, that the time traveling is not done, Marty McFly. You got to go to the future with your girl, and it was just meant as a ha. But then, of course, the film does so well, the producers, everybody wants a sequel, and he said though that if he had known that was coming, he would not have included. Jennifer, right, is the name of the girlfriend.
They changed the actress without saying anything.
Right. Well, that's the whole point. They would not have even included her in the final shot of the first one, he said, because in the second one, if you recall, the first thing that they have to do is knock her out when they get to the future and basically have her do nothing. But they had to bring her because in the end of the first one, if you're doing it as an immediate continuation, well, she's going, so you have to account for her presence, but also you don't really have anything for her to do. And you've changed actresses, so it would be somewhat incongruous. So you knock her out and throw her in an alley while you do what you're doing.
which was the best place to put her, clearly.
Of course,
not in the car, not sleeping in the back seat. This is the safest place for her, in and out.
Yeah.
The thing I find, that was a really good point. I'm glad you raised that, because one of the other things that I haven't raised was the end of the film. That is something that I won't forgive the film for. But now that you said that, if they hadn't made 2 and 3, the end of that film is way better than it was.
Yeah.
That's actually a really cool way to end that film franchise in a way.
Right.
It's just a single film and that's it. And it's epic. Now, I still enjoyed 2 and 3. I'm glad they made them.
Right.
But one of the things I thought, this is something that always bothered me. always bothered me about the film, and this would have been the one thing that I said I wish they wouldn't have done that, is the idea that like to fix so Marty, his son is going to be jailed or something in the future. And the
Sure.
best solution was, well, why don't we get Marty and Jennifer now? Let's bring them to the future, and then they can go talk to their kids, but they can't really talk to them, but they can probably do something about it. Nowhere is it like, okay, Marty, Doc, you've got Marty right there. Just say to Marty, listen, in 20 years' time, your kid's going to get involved with this gang. Just don't let him. Don't let him hang out with them.
Yeah.
Instead, he's like, why don't we take you to the future and we'll just deal with it when the shit's going down? And that always bothered me.
Yeah. That's one of those things.
Oh, but it makes it a bit better now that you said that it was just a bit of a fun ending. If you had ended it like that, that's not problematic. But because they had to then write a script and play that whole narrative out.
Yes, that's exactly right.
It just that annoys me. That's probably why I like 3 better than 2.
Yeah. I mean, 2 again was 3 was not subject to the same constraints because they could set 2 up to leave, to have 3, and they filmed them at the same time, so 3 could then just conclude naturally. But second one had to make these corrective things happen because of the way that the first one ends. Now, when we talked last time, you had said something that I was interested in. I thought you were telling me that there was something about the sort of the I'm going to use a word here because I think this was the word you used, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was something rapey about the film or
yeah, you know what? I got that confused with another film because Biff does get a bit rapey. And that's,
well, yes, of course he does.
He gets very rapey. But that's kind of Biff's character. And there was a film where there was I was watching just at around the same time. What was it? And there was a load of rapiness and it was okay. Oh, what was it? It's gonna escape me. It's a film that but my error on that. Biff is rapey, but Biff, I think we saw what happened.
That's the whole point. Yeah, he's a bad guy.
He's a bad guy. Oh, what film? That's gonna drive me nuts now.
Because I was watching it, looking for that. I'm sitting there watching Back to the Future. I'm like, gee, I don't remember that. But there could be things. I can tell you, a friend of ours, Darren, pointed out to me one day when he was over here. And we were sitting and talking with my wife and Tanya that Batman, the 1989 Batman film, has he's like, oh, that's like the worst superhero movie ever. I'm like, okay,
Michael Keaton, 1989, isn't it?
Yeah,
that one. Yeah,
I'm like, okay, why do you think so? I've got some reasons why I think that movie has definite weaknesses, but what are yours, Darren? And he said, well, it's rapey. I'm like, rapey? What are you talking about? And then he pointed to a sequence that definitely happens in that film where Batman's taking Vicky Vale to the Batcave. And at the end of it, she, asks him like, well, why did you bring me here? What do you want? Like, you could have sent this information, because he gives her some stuff for the press. She's like, you could have given this information to the press yourself. You don't need me. Why'd you bring me here? He says, oh, well, you're right. There is something else you have that I want. And he throws the cape up at the scene. And the next scene, she's in bed at home. And you're not sure what happened about that. And she feels her breasts and she realizes that she says, oh, he took the film.
Yeah.
Because she'd stuck a roll of film in her bra. But the way that is edited and the thing that she says really leave a lot of questions. He would have had to reach into her, private areas to go grab said film.
Yeah.
When she wakes up in the morning, she does not recall, because she said she feels and then says, oh, he took the film, which implies that she doesn't remember. So what? He gave her a roofie?
He used roofies.
Yeah, apparently. And it's something that honestly, of course I watched that movie that's a movie I did watch, Into the Ground. I could quote whole sequences for you. It was my favorite movie.
I could make an argument though. I can live with that because not it being rapey and not the fact that Batman used roofies as such, but I mean his remit is quite substantial as far as what he has to protect and save, and his responsibility is pretty dear. I would expect that Batman was quite respectful in his administration of the roofling, and his, he may have even gotten like a stick, and just maybe chopsticks.
Get out of there, right? It was a loose fitting blouse. You're right. Yeah. He didn't necessarily have to remove it.
Turned her upside down and just shook her legs until That would have been the right way to go.
Perhaps,
So
but I mean, nevertheless, the point is that that movie does introduce a concept that, you know, if you stop and think, you're like, wait a minute, right? Whereas, so I was watching Back to the Future expecting some other kind of hold on a second moment, and it never came. But I will say that, and this is something, you know, if you're looking for problematic elements of Back to the Future, I don't know if that's what we're doing on this podcast, but since we're on the subject, I post on a message board that's really ostensibly about the Phillies, but it has a whole off-topic section, and you know, every topic under the sun gets discussed. And somebody once pointed out about Back to the Future that actually, you know, the part that's really problematic is
Marlins.
the sequel. No, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, that one's like, wait a minute, did they really go to the future, right? Like make this, but in terms of today's politics, or even those politics, if they'd been thinking about it, the sequence where, you know, they're at the dance and Michael J. Fox gets up on the stage because the one guitar player has his hand cut, and so he fills in. Okay, that's all fine, and he's able to kind of join in and be the guitarist for the songs. But then he decides, you know, when it's working and everything's going well, and he celebrates by saying, all right, everybody follow me. And he starts playing like Chuck Berry style music. And you see the one band member in the back saying, hey, Chuck. And he's obviously supposed, and I guess they've established that band member's last name is Berry. So the idea is like, he's like, hey, cousin, you know that new sound you're looking for? And then he holds the phone up. So basically it takes a style of music. And of course, the famous thing about rock and roll is that on a racial politics level is that so much of it is that it's sound that was basically invented within the black community and is appropriated by whites. It turns that upside down and makes Michael J, you know, like Marty McFly, the white progenitor of rock and roll that was then stolen by black artists. And I don't think they thought that through all that far. Think so either. But if they had, they might have reconsidered whether or not that was the joke they wanted to go for.
Can I share? I actually was able to bring this up, and this is I think I mentioned to you before, one of my favorite things is the Star Wars parody by Family Guy. It's one of my, I would almost say that I almost like it as much as the actual film itself. Have you seen those, by the way?
Oh, I have.
And do you like those, by the way?
They're not my favorite, I'll be honest. The thing I find with them is that they're you're bringing it up. I thought
it's me. Don't worry. So
I thought they got slavishly devoted to like doing the entire plot of each film to the point that they kind of forgot at times. Like there were long sequences where they were just making sure they hit all the plot points of.
I love that. I love that attention.
Which was impressive, but then what that means is that they're not really doing a lot of jokes. You know what I mean? Like they're having to like run because you know they're trying to squeeze a 120-minute film into a 55-minute episode. So like if you're going to hit all the plot points, you're going to have to kind of move it through, and sometimes the jokes just stopped even being put in. I felt. Having said that, one of my favorite sequences from Family Guy ever is in the first of the three of those, where they're sitting around talking about the Death Star. You know,
and Stewie is like, maybe we should
get estimates.
but that's the thing I love about Family Guy is the subtlety, and like that's one of my two of my top favorite jokes. The other one I loved was they fired the gun and blew up Tatooine. And like you have two guys who are standing on the bannerless, the railless sort of edge when the gun goes by, and as soon as the gun shoots and blows up Tatooine, the one guy's like, "I just want a rail, you know?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, well they said we'd be leaning all day." It was just this whole like sort of making these normal people that are going to work and having these normal complaints, you know, these stormtroopers that are there. But I saw this weirdly in the last couple of weeks, and this is another. One thing I love about Family Guy is how they take these items and sort of cross-reference other cultural references. And now this is the bit. I love this bit.
Hey, Rick, it's your cousin Marvin. Marvin Astley. You know that mediocre generic sound you've been looking for? Well, listen to this. this.
So much. You know that mediocre joint you've been looking for.
That is
brilliant.
very funny.
Oh, I had to share that. I really want to see. I'm just desperate to see Seth MacFarlane do a proper, same as he did with Star Wars with Back to the Future, because I think he really he grew up at the same time we did, and a lot of his jokes, and he makes fun of himself for it, very much are homage to his childhood, and you know, even the commercials, like the whole I was watching with my wife, and I have to tell her some of the references, because there was one where Peter says, "Oh, I'm not feeling too well. I have diarrhea," but he goes, "Diarrhea," and his stomach swells up from that. I forget what it is, that Pepto commercial.
Yeah.
I would just love to see him do the Back to the Future series.
You know, I think that there's probably a reason he hasn't, and the reason is that I think it's a lot more difficult to sustain something like that he did with the Star Wars films than with Back to the Future, because those films are originally intended as comedies to some degree. Like they are tongue-in-cheek. They're not meant to be 100% serious. And I just think that in general, to do a parody of something that started as a comedy is much more difficult to pull off
that's a
than
really good point.
something that, you know, was meant to be taken basically seriously.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that they did was the Three Wise Men. And that was one I saw the other day. Dude, very good parody of that. Christmas, the Jesus being born and all that.
Oh, I was thinking like, you mean Johnny, Jack, and
No.
Jim Beam?
No. The Three Wise Men bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Of course. Yeah.
But, just thought that was rich. So I guess we need to review this film as far as we need to give it a score, which is always going to be a challenge for us as we determine our metrics for scoring. And I think as we do this now, if you haven't watched this channel, I'm going to try to bring some of the stuff over from the other channel we started doing. But I think this film is helping me recalibrate my scoring a little bit. I think I've been a bit generous with the numbers because I'm thinking about where this film sits. This is an iconic film as far as I'm concerned. And my view is that this is a one of those films that I think, you know, is going to be relative for years to come. It's, you know, at the time it was cutting edge with the special effects, and the storytelling was just incredible. Acting was incredible. I would put this in sort of the 8.5 region.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. And you know that when we've gotten to this section of the reviews, the one thing, because some of the things we've done, a la Rocky IV, for example, I felt we were reviewing not because I think it's a great film in a strict sense, but rather because it's an entertaining film, at times for reasons totally unintended by the producers. And I think, like, for example, with Rocky IV, just to revisit that so I can calibrate the scale for calibrating the scale. Like, the question is at the end, if Sylvester Stallone is in all earnestness and sincerity in the script that he wrote or helped to write, in the speech that he has Rocky deliver, you know, he thinks he's doing something good and serious, and in reality it's laughable in a fun way, but it is laughable. You know, it's not serious in any way. So I would give that movie like a high rating, but not like, there's sort of like, I guess I almost imagine the scale kind of like you know, you start at a 10 and you can come all the way down, and then you can kind of rebound if it's good, like if it's good in sort of like a, you know, in an entertaining way. But this movie just hits the mark, I think, all the way through. And so 8.5, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I can't say it's a perfect film, but not for the nitpicky reasons that you kind of enumerated. I mean, those things like, look, you're going to do a time travel film. I don't know that there's because time travel is at best theoretical. I don't know that there's a way to do a time travel story that doesn't have some kind of continuity head scratching about it.
I agree.
So I think you're always going to run into those problems if you do a time travel story. I think this movie is really as effective a time travel story as I can think of. And I've watched every episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Star Trek Voyager. And of course, time travel is used in those quite a bit, and often as much as anything for a cheap plot device, because they just want to do the story in the past or whatever. This is built well, and it's the time travel is part of, it's not just a plot device so you can do the movie in 1955, it's part of the plot, which makes it great. there are, I would say that to the degree that the movie has any flaws, it's around the margins. There's some political stuff that you wouldn't pull off today, and there's just some of it's a little cartoonish in certain ways, but these are minor issues. I would say,
think so.
8.5, or I might even do you half a point better here and go 9. I think
9.
it does
I could
pretty
give
much
it a 9.
the scale that I would say here is. I think the fairest way to do a movie is what are its ambitions for itself? What does it set out to do? And I think this movie set certain ambitions for itself, and I think in almost every respect, it hits the nail right on the head.
I think you can say it overachieved, really. Because I don't think I mean, of course, they want to make a great film, and I would say if you compare it to, let's say, the iconic quote Avengers films that are grossing a lot of money, I would say that that's just a film that's been, a lot of money's been chucked into it. Whereas I think this film is very creative, and it's they didn't necessarily think this was going to be the iconic film that it was. I mean, the script was passed on so many times. So actually, I think you've made a good point. I'm happy to go with a 9 on this because it is such an iconic film. Everything about it is iconic. So we'll call this one a 9. And now we're on to that's video 1 done on our new Speakeasy Reviews channel. We just need to decide what's coming next. So Andrew, I think you and I can discuss that offline. But
that sounds good.
I think this was a good first show on the new channel.
I agree. I think we speaking of hitting it on the head, we may not be a 9 on this show, but I give us a solid 7 anyway.
I'd say 7. I think there's potential there. There's a lot of growth we have to do, but we got to keep breaking pots to learn how to make good ones. So
exactly.
Anybody who's watching this, who's made it this far, you have to subscribe. I did make one of these before. Boom! Subscribe, please join us.
Please, yes.
Yeah, and if we get enough subscribers, we'll go live with this, and we'll get your opinions as well. So Andrew, until next week, I look forward to catching up with you, and to everybody who watched, take care. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.
Have a good one, all.